Hey folks, thanks all for joining here. Um, I'm I've asked. I'm not able to be on video tonight, so I've asked Matt to. Well, Matt has volunteered to lead tonight's session, so I'm gonna be a regular attendee. Not the I didn't feel like it's appropriate to lead without being on the video. So I'm gonna have Matt take charge here, and I'm gonna take some notes and just be one of the crowd here tonight. So Matt, it is all you.
All right. Well, great. Well, welcome, Grace. The idea at the last meeting was to invite Grace to come in and update us on the various transportation-related projects that she has, if not responsibility for, at least some insight into, and can update us. So, what I had done was had a conversation with Grace where we kind of walked through the document that Kyle had prepared, listing the projects that we're aware of, and I think identify the ones that that Grace has some involvement in, and so we can maybe touch on others to the extent that she has some input there. The one thing I did in advance of this meeting, Grace, was share the streetscape for Farmington Avenue, which thank you for sharing that with me. So everybody has that, and so when we get to Farmington Avenue, we can talk about it. So I think we'll just sort of dive right in, and I'm looking at the updated West End transportation projects, and we'll take these in turn and skip over the ones and identify which ones I'm skipping over. Skip over the ones that I don't think that Grace has a role in, and we'll revisit those another time. So so Grace, welcome. Thanks for taking time this evening to join this fledgling motley crew of transportation folks from WECA, and we'll let you tell us everything you'd like to, and folks jump in with questions. But first off is the Asylum Avenue Road Diet. So could you fill us in there?
Yes. First of all, hi everyone. As mentioned, I'm Grace C. with the City of Hartford's Department of Development Services Planning Division. A bit of a mouthful. Glad to be back. I know it's been a bit of a while, but nice to see a few familiar faces and names. Regarding some of the projects, as mentioned, I have varying levels of involvement, but for Asylum Avenue, that's certainly one where we wanted to update you, and where myself and DPW are working together closely. So as it relates to Asylum Ave, we had a number of comments and feedback come up about different areas and different concerns, including one, the shared red bus bike lane, two, the changing parking conditions, and then separately, this was more of an Asylum Hill concern on the area in front of the Archdiocese and their particular special event activities. So we did meet separately. Again, I know this is Asylum Hill that I'm mentioning, where we went to their Quality of Life and Public Safety Committee upon invite to share them a couple of the design modifications we had tinkered around with after hearing some of the feedback. And with that, I can just share some of those options that we had put forth. One, as it relates to parking at Wood Street, which is where we're actually shifting the parking to, is going to be alternating parking. One, to slow down speeds, and then two, it would allow northbound traffic to still travel, especially to the ambulance care area in that area. A note that we are still tinkering with how to improve the pedestrian crossings in that area, while we are planning to add some crosswalks there as needed. Trying to improve the visibility and sightline is something that we're also looking to do. And then I think the ratio of spaces between that Woodland to Sigourney area is it's not exactly 1-to-1. There's maybe a difference of about 10 or so spaces. However, that area is also going to have a residential parking program update as a whole. Regarding the red shared bus bike lane, it was a good point that was brought up that it can be confusing for folks, especially because it's just a one block area, not, across a longer corridor that you might see in other places and communities. So instead of that, we are switching to a buffered bike lane design, but that space will still have signage to allow for buses, the HARC buses specifically, to park there as needed. So during the rest of the time, you know, bikes will be able to traverse, but then during those times when HARC buses are there anyway, they would still be allowed to park accordingly. And then for those that wanted to still traverse, we would have sharrows and slip ramps, whether you wanted to stay in road or on the sidewalk. On the side closer to West End, I know where there's the reverse curve area, particularly with the materials, we've had different thoughts, especially touching base with Hartford Fire Department about increasing the spacing between materials. So it's maybe not as tightly spaced as what you might see on Wethersfield Ave, where they're pretty close together. Here it would be probably between 10 to 15 feet. So it's not as maybe a dramatic aesthetic change on that front. So those are some of the things that we've been just trying to talk through in terms of design. I didn't know if you had any other particular thoughts that might have come up in previous WECA West End meeting that you know, you wanted to share as we continue to make these modifications.
Now's your chance if you if you do have particular concerns about Asylum Avenue. Going once.
I just wanted to like leave a positive comment. I'm a big fan of this. I've been to, you know, at least one of the meetings and left a comment. So I appreciate what the city's trying to do, especially on like for the price that it's going to cost. I know I heard a lot of people asking for like dedicated bike lanes and stuff like that. You know, why would it make sense to do something in the street? Well, because it's cheaper. And so I think it's a good idea. I think the road diet, like everywhere else that a road diet's been implemented, it works. And so I'm excited to see this. Politically, I'm nervous about it because I read in the West End paper that like every single mayoral candidate is opposed to it. But you know, for me, for what I have to say, I think it's a good plan.
I didn't read that. Okay. Any other questions, comments on the Asylum Avenue Road Diet?
I have one, Grace. It's Kyle. Timeline wise, and kind of where is it really going to happen? And if so, when do you expect it to happen?
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the month of April to make those actual design modifications, one that we've been talking about verbally and actually changing that and in the design itself. We'll bring that design forward for West End and Asylum Hill to look on and discuss during your May meetings if you would like. Of course, not forcing you to chat about Asylum Ave if you didn't want to. And then from there, we're hoping to move forward accordingly with implementation.
So do you think you'll have fully baked designs by May?
That's the hope. Yep, that we can. It's mostly baked. It's tweaking, I think, those particular areas. So it's not as if we're recreating the wheel.
Got it. Okay. All right. I'm going to skip.
Oh, I do have comments.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm running late. So I heard that this was implementation of the bicycle plan that Sandy Fry worked on before she left. Is that true? Is that why this is moving ahead in front of the mobility study?
So it's a good point to mention right there. These projects are on different timescales. Greater Hartford Mobility Study is a much larger scope, larger scale. That's more permanent design. This is for interim treatments. What we can do with striping, quick build style. So it's a different scale. So Greater Hartford Mobility Study, it could be, in the next 5 years, it could be in the next 15, depending on some of these projects. Whereas this is something we can get in this year.
So I'm concerned. I'm concerned about other things that were in that bicycle plan that were passed. That, that it, was a kind of 30,000-foot plan. And, maybe it seems temporary to the planners who have bigger plans for the future. But the resources, the taxpayer dollars are going to this instead of other things like that. I guess these plastic poles that will be, I guess they're PVC poles that will be put up. Is that correct?
I don't have the specific FlexiPost specs on me, but they are plastic.
And those will essentially change the appearance of Asylum Avenue. Will the flexi poles, and they'll be bolted into the street, right? And it's not just painted lines. And do we know how they're gonna street clean the actual bike lanes if the flexi poles are there, or are the flexi poles only at the intersections?
So it's not only at the intersections. However, on Wethersfield Avenue, DPW has noted they have separate equipment for that area.
For street cleaning.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I guess, just the flexi poles and like whether they're attractive. It's just an example of how city resources are going to these projects. Of course, the cost of the planners themselves, and if all of this, because the bicycle plan was approved, is just happening at the planning office, I'd just like to raise a red flag and say, these projects the site-specific projects need to come back to the neighborhoods before they get as far along as this one has, because as you can see, a lot of things on that bicycle plan that were approved are not actually what the neighbors wanted.
Sorry, just taking notes. So I know that
It's our taxpayer dollars. Many of us have lived here for a long time, and we can't get anything advanced in the planning department. But then all of a sudden this sweeps through, and this is what the money's going to get spent on.
So I know that I think look at the larger scale of this particular project. It's also about road safety, especially having some pretty notable intersections of with crash incidents. But on the planning side, there's also now an effort to really have the neighborhood planning level come up to speed. You may have heard that there's, for example, Frog Hollow, Southwest, Upper Albany, Northeast, have all, they're the phase 1.5, of the city's multi-year effort to have more neighborhood specific plans. And likewise, in parallel, I know the NRZs are also looking to have strategic plans to complement that are more resident led. So I know looking forward on the planning side, that's probably something that is hopefully a little bit more reassuring in terms of level of engagement. On previous plans, of course, there's some level of iteration and having these plans be a guideline for us to move forward, because there's been a certain level of methodology to how they were based on traffic speeds, traffic volumes, roadway widths, etc. So that's why the plan was helpful, in that it already had gone through some of those exercises of what are the metrics that we need to the parameters where these designs might work.
So one last point. Thank you for being here this evening and listening. I actually do ride my bicycle around, and I talk to people about bicycling and who's bicycling where, and just like I saw people at the law school, at the HIU who were bicycling, and just random people. I asked them, where do you bicycle? Do you bicycle in the street, or do you walk? And everybody was like, no, I bicycle on the sidewalk, I don't bicycle in the street, and I don't use the bike lane. So, moving forward, I realize that there's a lot of gutsy commuters, guys, mostly, but you know, people of all ages, I hope you start talking to people of all ages about where they actually bicycle, you know, because we have, I mean, I think a handful of us have repeatedly said, you know, why not let us bicycle down, you know, down Elizabeth Street, you know, through pathways, down Niles Street. Those are the back road routes that people use that I talk to. So I don't know, maybe all these West Hartford people who have these jobs in Hartford come down Asylum on their bikes and, you know, in all their gear, but I don't see that happening in our neighborhood. And I may have missed Elijah's points, but he may be doing that, but I haven't met them.
And I think, of course, the ideal is to have separated, you know, facilities so that everyone feels comfortable. And it's really trying to get a bit of the chicken and the egg of, you know, building versus, you know, to a certain extent with the resources. And so certainly we're going to try to. When Sandy Fry was working on this, it was always about bicycle lanes on busy streets. We repeatedly said, we really need bicycle paths to schools, right? To places, neighborhood places. And so I think going forward to ask in creating bicycle pathways, are you creating bicycle safe paths to schools? That might really contribute to the neighborhood rather than just commuters from outside the city going into downtown jobs.
So Grace, am I right that in May, then the Asylum Hill and West End NRZs will have the opportunity to weigh in on the final plan? Is that right? Or will that be an information session, or will that actually be an input session? Just to sort of understand at that point what the purpose of those meetings will be.
Right. So I know the way that Asylum Hill is approaching it is that we'll give them the plans in April, and then their neighborhood is going to discuss it at their early May meeting. And then they're choosing to, I believe, vote on it. I don't know if West End would want to approach it in the same way, or if, I know you meet bi-monthly as well, so I don't know if you have a April versus a May meeting, but you do have a later April date, so perhaps we would have something in advance of that.
And what would happen if the Asylum Hill NRZ, and let's assume that West End one votes as well, that both voted against the project? What would happen?
I think that would have to go back to the rest of the group.
Okay. And let me ask, because the question of the whatever we call these plastic, I'll call them dividers, I guess, that I've seen on Wethersfield, I hadn't fully appreciated they'd be an Asylum too. I think we're going to talk about Farmington Avenue a little in a second, but I don't think the design for Farmington Avenue includes those, although it does include bike lanes. Is that right?
Farmington Avenue, yes, and Farmington Avenue has a different setup. I don't know if that's a segue into the next one, actually.
No, it wasn't intended to be, but I guess the question was going to be how is from a design standpoint, what drives the decision to incorporate those into a design or not?
Right, and I think in this sense, if we did, if you all have had a chance to look at it in advance, I know that you sent it in advance, but the Farmington Avenue project is a streetscape change, which it actually is changing, you know, the curbs, there's adding concrete, and then there's also the aspect where there's parking.
Grace, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I had my hand up, and just before we leave Asylum Avenue, I'm not sure if you are now moving on to Farmington Avenue, but I wanted to ask one question.
No, why don't you go ahead, Rafi? Let's wrap up Asylum and then.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just I thought we were still on Asylum. For people like me, there's been a problem that I get to some of these meetings and I don't get to others, and I miss a meeting. And I understand when you miss a meeting, you miss important stuff, and you don't necessarily get a chance to talk about it afterwards. But I kind of perked up when Mary started talking about the flexible poles, or whatever they're called, because the last time I was actively in a conversation about that was on the transportation on the bikeway whatever was gonna be the bike route along Beacon Street from one end of Beacon to the other. And there was there was proposal to have what I think are those poles at a couple places in the blocks, and there was unified opposition to them, partly on aesthetic grounds, partly on the specifics of the way in which it would narrow the roadway at those points. And I thought the message was kind of conveyed fairly clearly at the time, this is now a while ago, that was something we really didn't like. So I apparently missed the meetings where they talked about those pieces on Asylum Avenue. And I am sensitive to not redoing stuff people have already discussed and decided. But I just wanted to, I worry sometimes, and Grace, I've said this to you in a different context, the comments that are made, you know, at meeting number 3 in a sequence don't necessarily hold by the time you get to meeting number 5 or number 6, unless someone comes to all of the meetings and keeps raising the same point over and over again. And so I just don't know what discussion there's been on that, but the aesthetics in particular, people really didn't like. I understand the pragmatic issues about bike lanes and trying to segment them off from the motor vehicles on the roadway. But my recollection is that at least at some meeting I was at where we were talking about Asylum Avenue, one of the issues was that the bike path seemed to go on and off the street, from the street to the sidewalk, then back to the street, then back to the sidewalk. And I couldn't tell from this discussion whether that aspect was taken care of, but I don't recall there ever being talk about the flexible poles. So I just wanted to say that from my perspective, some pieces of this are news to me, but it's my own fault for not being up on it. But so if these are all things that have been decided, then I'm really untimely. If they're not, then I guess I would just stick the thoughts into the discussion.
So, right, I think there are 2 points to that. One is the connectivity of the bicycle facilities. And I will say we did work to make some design modifications to one, make it so that's more consistent throughout. The area, for example, at the reverse curve, I know that people had particular concerns. That area actually has a 5-foot shoulder as it stands. So that isn't disappearing, that space to have, you know, alternative uses. And then I think in the other area, I'm just trying to recall, we added in that buffered bike lane in place of the shared bus bike, so that it's more consistent visually for people going, for example, from Sumner to Sigourney to Woodland. So connectivity, just want to let you know on that front. And then on the aspect of aesthetics, it has come up at the Asylum meetings, certainly recognize that. And I do want to note that Beacon, North Beacon, that is much more residential and neighborhood based, whereas Asylum Ave is on the busier side, especially where you have different mixes of uses. So one option that we're considering is, of course, the spacing. And then there are different materials. For example, they're called armadillos, but they're much lower relief, and they're not, and they're black because it's a different style. That's something that we haven't fully workshopped out. I will say, though, it is more the visibility of the flexi post for both drivers and cyclists is a bit easier because they're taller. You can see them; they're more present. So I do want to note that in terms of alternative materials, sometimes the actual travel experience is easier when you have those materials. So,
do you know, Grace, to what extent roads and streets in the West End, as distinct from Farmington Avenue, which is kind of unique, to the extent to which roads and streets are in historic districts?
Off the top of my head, I don't, unfortunately.
Okay. Does that affect anything in the planning? For example, if this may not be true, but if Asylum Hill, or rather if Asylum Avenue were in a historic district rather than running between historic districts, would that make a difference in how the city approached any of the design aspects that we're going to make physical changes in the road?
So I would have to get back to you on that, on the historic side of things. I can't say I know with great level of confirmation, just because I think when I've considered when I've heard about historic applications on our end in the past, they're mostly tied to facades and exterior aspects of buildings. So when it comes to right-of-way in-street infrastructure, that's often the jurisdiction of, our Public Works Department. And zoning and historic preservation is often tied to, the private property side. So I do want to just touch base with, those that might be a little bit more versed on this one.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I'll just echo Grace. I share the aesthetic concern. I think that the question that I would have maybe for the May meeting is, when we consider the potential, what the planners believe the value add from the buffers is, which I assume is probably twofold. One, to protect the bicyclists from traffic, and also to deter motorists from using the bike lane to pass, or essentially turning what was supposed to be 2 lanes back into 4 lanes. The benefits against the aesthetic concerns, and I think probably some other practical concerns about maintaining the road and street cleaning and plowing and all those other things that I'm not expert on, but I can well imagine that being another topic of discussion in May. So rather than devote more time to it now, I guess I would say come prepared, because I think that's probably going to be a theme that you hear again. But let's move on. I'm going to skip over on our list on-street parking changes, which I think we've got to talk to Parking Authority about. Elizabeth Park, which is not Grace, is what I put down in my notes here. The sewer work, I think we're up to speed on. They're doing it now, frustratingly. I had asked Grace about this Asylum Avenue pedestrian bridge. I don't think you knew about it then. Did you happen to learn anything about that, Grace, or we can skip over it if not?
So unfortunately, not so much. So yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll keep that on our list for another victim. So the next one, just in order here, is the Beacon North Beacon, which we just touched on briefly. So Grace, if you don't mind, giving us an update on sort of where that is.
Right. So for North Beacon from the workshop that we had last year, we had a number of comments, including what was shared on aesthetics, and then also the opportunity to explore alternatives to traffic calming in that particular area. And because we are actually working on Blue Hills right now with another Slow Streets effort, where we're not looking just at one street, but several streets, so that we're treating things a little bit more holistically. That was another comment that came up during last year's North Beacon workshop, that if we do something on North Beacon, can we try to be as thoughtful as possible, not to push it onto the street immediately next over. So with that in mind, we are looking to get design restarted, looking at the space as a whole. So you've got, of course, North Beacon, Whitney, and then I believe Fern, because that crosses into that space. So that's generally where that's headed. We are in the process of, really bringing on our design team. We've got a lot of work for them to do. So once they are squared away, we'll be back so that people can have more of that dialogue on what they see across those streets. So that funding for design is secured. We just need to get that team on board.
And will there be a process of engaging again the neighbors in those design efforts with this renewed effort now?
Yes. So with the Slow Streets effort now, again, using Blue Hills as an example, because it's slightly, it's happening, I think, in tandem. We also had built-in community engagement hours, so that we could be sure to kind of have that discourse together with the neighborhood.
So more to come, I think. Mary, is that a hand raise?
It is, yeah. So, kind of changing topics. I'm not sure. So do you guys want to stay focused on Farmington for a minute, or can I just talk about planning and bicycle trails in general?
Well, if I think it's germane to what they're trying to do with the Beacon North Beacon Bicycle Corridor, let's hear it.
Well, so going back to this whole issue of riding bikes off street, right? And if I ride west, I'll go through Elizabeth Park or kind of go through the neighborhood streets until I can get into Elizabeth Park. And I'm wondering, I know that the city is hiring someone or a team, a design team to work on Elizabeth Park East. Will a bike path be a part of that? Is that something that's a question? And then one other point about that I've now forgotten because I know. So the city had gotten money. They started doing neighborhood plans in Upper Albany and Frog Hollow, some of the other neighborhoods. They've hired outside designers. Is the West End, evidently this is some follow-up to the lack of neighborhood planning from the Plan of Conservation and Development, which was passed during the pandemic. Is there going to be an assigned planner to the West End, and are you following that process?
So when it comes to just to jump to the first part on Elizabeth Park, I don't know too much about that project, so I can't speak to that one. And jumping back to neighborhood plans, so year one was, as mentioned, Frog Hollow, Upper Albany, Northeast, and one that is eluding me, and then we've got Southwest Behind the Rocks. This is again multi-year, so we can't do all the NRZs in 1 year. So I think that West End will be in, but I can't say I'm sure where it will fall because again there are multiple NRZs. But yes, the intent is to have a neighborhood plan for each of the neighborhoods.
So are the RFPs for those, are those something that the neighborhood is involved in choosing the design team?
Hey, Mary, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt here? So this has taken us off topic a bit.
Okay.
So I've been in touch with the planning department, and I can talk with you offline about how West End will get involved with that process.
Okay, because I just it is a place where bicycle paths and walking paths could be.
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
And this is another not a question for Grace. Grace, are you still doing green infrastructure planning, or is that assigned to somebody else in the planning department?
So green infrastructure was when I was with the Office of Sustainability. So I am not in that realm anymore. I'm in transportation planning. So
somebody else at planning is wetlands and green infrastructure issues.
Wetland, there's for wetlands related permits, etc. Those application questions do go to one of our staff members in the planning division, but I don't believe that they do green infrastructure planning specifically. Again, green infrastructure was back when I was in sustainability, so it wasn't even in the planning division when I was doing it.
So the city's sort of dropping that as a formal position.
So that position was grant funded.
Okay. And sorry, this is another technical question that's more related to green infrastructure, but the University of Hartford has applied for a permit to put a large
Mary, I'm sorry. This is a transportation meeting. It's not a green infrastructure meeting.
Sorry.
Gonna have to reel you in again.
All right. Well, with that, so unless there are, it sounds like we're going to hear more on the Beacon North Beacon plan and how that's going to impact everything. So absent any specific questions there, which probably would be premature, I would say let's move on. And I'm going to skip. We'll come back, but just because geographically we're there now, maybe it's time to talk about Farmington Avenue, which we sort of touched on before, in terms of some of the design elements, and it won't have these flexi poles. So maybe you could just give us a high level sketch of that, and everybody should have from the email earlier today the actual nice drawing of that. So if anyone has any questions, now's your chance. So take it away, Grace.
Yep. So, yeah, I think just to give everyone a high level refresher on the Farmington Avenue, it stretches from Prospect Ave all the way to Denison. And it is more involved as a project because it is a streetscape. So it includes landscaping, new sidewalks, milling and paving, resurfacing, restriping, intersection treatments. So it is a full gamut, and it is again a larger, more permanent infrastructure change. So if you are able to refer to the role plan, I don't know if I can also share my screen, but it's always a little bit challenging especially with role plans because they're so long. But it includes there was bicycle
Maybe just a second, Grace, maybe we can pull it up. I don't know, Kyle, does Grace have the ability to share?
Yes, she does.
Okay. Do you want to try and pull it up, Grace?
Try here. Verbal, does that work? Verbally, yes or no? Can you see it?
Yep.
Like,
there it is.
can zoom in? It's a little.
Probably gonna have to zoom in, but yep, there it is.
It works.
Okay. So there's a little bit of lag, but all right. Let me keep scrolling. All right, so as it relates to existing conditions, there was existing parking and existing bicycle lanes. So you do see some of that reiterated here in the corridor throughout. So it's going to be a different space compared to what you see on Asylum. Again, the dynamics here are a little bit different. That being said, I did want to point out that at the intersections, particularly of our smaller side streets, you do see bump outs going in. And these are not flexible post bump outs, but concrete and paver style bump outs. There's also raised crosswalks wherever you see these markings here with the little triangles leading up to the crosswalk. That's where it's actually raised. So people are more likely to slow down because there's, it's kind of like a speed hump bump, but it's tied to the crosswalk. So it's actually level when you cross. And then as you keep going here, again, preserving parking in these spaces, it's going a little bit slower. Whenever you see these darker green trees, that's actually new trees going in. West End has some really amazing mature trees. So that's why there's a lot that's being preserved as a part of this effort.
Can I ask maybe a dumb question, but why have the raised sidewalks on the side streets as opposed to on Farmington Avenue? Because those you're going to have to stop there anyway. It's not through, but if you're on Farmington, you don't have a stop sign. So the only reason you would have to stop is because there is a pedestrian.
Right. So I might not be able to speak to this particular design, but I know that when speaking about speed hump and other vertical speed bump style placement on streets, that if it's a larger corridor, they can't always have that vertical traffic calming because they need to get emergency vehicles more quickly down those larger streets. So you're more likely to see those speed humps, speed bumps on smaller / neighborhood or residential streets than you are on these areas where you need to get those emergency access vehicles along quickly. I can double check on Farmington, but
yeah, I mean, one observation I would just make, I asked the question because, there are stop signs at each of these side streets to come onto Farmington. So, rarely I think do you see anybody, I mean, they'd already be breaking the law if they were blowing through the intersection. And I'll tell you from experience that what you find as a motorist there is as you approach Farmington, say from Oxford Street, where we're looking at right there, if you want to do anything other than make a right turn, you at some point have to gun it, because you're going to have traffic coming both ways on Farmington Avenue. And so I just wonder whether you actually create a risk that, you know, motorists are impeded. I don't know what these raised sidewalks are like, but if they're gonna prevent the ability to move quickly when you have an opportunity to try to pull through the intersection, then they might be counterproductive.
So I can take that back to the team just to make sure that I'm speaking appropriately on that. I will note that on the Farmington side, that's where you do see the bump outs. That reduces the crossing distance for pedestrians. And then also it's considered, you know, when you have vertical traffic coming is when it's, you know, raised and they have something to go over, or there's something sticking out of the ground. And here it's really visually narrowing the space as well.
Well, I'm all for that. And this is less about pedestrians. I'm just thinking you don't want to have the risk that you're creating car accidents because the cars that are traversing the side streets are actually somewhat encumbered when they're trying to cross Farmington Avenue. I speak without having seen one of these things. I don't know what it's like. Maybe it's a complete non-issue. I could just imagine if there were something that qualified as a speed hump there, I could see that being causing accidents, not preventing them. That's just the observation.
So they have, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say they have been used in other parts of the city. I'll see if I can wrangle a photo or two or a location or two.
That'd be great.
I just want to say my observation, because I actually do cross the street kind of in that area, and you know, a car might crawl out to this bump outs before as you say, gunning it across the intersection, but who knows. I did have a question about the bicycle lane. So the way I'm looking at where the bicycle lane is that the bicycle lane is between the cars and the parked cars, or the bus lane, right? It's not really a protected bicycle lane on Farmington Avenue. And I know we're not talking about green infrastructure, but those bump outs in some cities, and I don't think it's necessarily appropriate, but some cities have made, you know, bump outs and things green infrastructure. I understand why that's a problem in, you know, maintenance and all this other stuff, but yeah, so those are two questions. And actually followed by kind of a third is, why not just create a bike lane that's more adjacent to the sidewalk and then have, you know, just less street space? Because I just don't see people respecting the bicycle lanes if they're where they're located now.
So I think when it comes to the bicycle lane placement, so I have to admit I am coming in on the end of this process. Lots of it was designed prior. However, given the width of the space, as well as you know, I think feedback about preserving parking areas for activities, and then just the width of the road in general. That's why you don't have maybe a buffered bike lane or a bike lane that is, you know, in a different place. That's my general understanding on why the setup is what it is right now. On landscaping and bump out areas or other medians, well, maybe not here. I know that for other areas where we're looking at, for example, Reimagine Main Street, where we're not as far in the design process as what we can see here, we are looking at increasing the landscape and taking advantage of those spaces. Here, though, I do want to note that we do have structural soil and silva soils in place. So that does allow for trees to have more space. And then to a certain extent, storage of water. I know it's not as if it's an exposed bioswale per se, but just wanted to note on that front.
So I see hands, and I apologize because I'm like really bad at looking over and checking. So Elijah, do you want to go, and then Rafi?
I think I was the last person to raise my hand, so I'm more than happy to wait if we want to be particular about order.
Well, all right, Rafi, I think you're up. And then Elijah.
Oh,
One-
I'm sorry. I was mute. I didn't know I was muted, but no, I was saying Elijah, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay.
As long as I get a turn, I'm okay.
So this, am I muted? No, I'm not. Okay. This is my first time actually seeing the proper design for the streetscape. I know I looked it up a few months ago and I was just able to see what was Googleable, and it looked fantastic. And I'm very excited to see what's here. So Grace, I guess I've got a couple small questions. One, if I'm right, and I'm reading this right, so the bike lane is going to be buffered by virtue of a rumble strip.
So that was the original, what's shown on here, having a rumble strip. I know that we've had some comments about the rumble strip as well. So the consultant is taking another look at that space. But did you have a specific comment on rumble strips?
I mean, if the choice is between a rumble strip and no rumble strip, I'll take the rumble strip. I think given the constraints of the area, like, you can't take away people's free street parking without it causing the end of the world. So you have to keep the bike lane between parking and the traffic lane. Hopefully the bump outs create enough of like a traffic calming effect that, and like the fact that it's going to be kind of a road diet in and of itself. You know, the lanes are going to be narrower. That's going to slow down traffic. I think it's a really cool plan. I'm very excited to see it implemented, hopefully within my lifetime. And my other question, this might be more of like a zoning question, but are there, because I know the city got rid of parking minimums, correct?
Yes.
What's the minimum setback here for this stretch of Farmington? You know, it's a very technical question, but
I can find out for you, and I know I have your email because you've kindly shared comments on other transportation projects. So I can find out.
Yeah, I'm just one person. I would love to see setbacks, if they exist, reduced, just as like mandatory minimums. I think the fact that like the buildings get closer to the street creates a more just like friendly, welcoming pedestrian environment, and just gives it a more vibrant feel. Like I feel the best example I can give of that is like I live on Whitney, where we have all these, you know, beautiful 100-year-old multifamily homes that kind of hug the street. And then if you go, you know, 3 blocks that way into West Hartford, everything just feels kind of like empty because they have such crazy setbacks that I don't know, it doesn't have the same kind of ambiance. I love the whole idea of doing the Farmington streetscape. I think if it's done right, it can be like the most vibrant economic corridor in the city. But you know, those are just my thoughts.
Great, and I appreciate that. And I would say that on the setbacks, that's certainly something on the zoning reg side for, when it comes to new development for buildings that are largely already there. I know it's always a little bit challenging unless they have some new additions. I do realize, just also jumping back, since you mentioned balancing and, trying to fit things into different spaces, as well as a previous point that Mary made on separated / more, closer to the sidewalk facilities where there is enough space in the road, or where there is, a lot of space for us to work with. For example, just bringing up Main Street again, that is going to have a cycle track on their part. Some of you may or may not have participated in that 2020 study process, but again, different spaces. Main Street at one point, it has 9-10 lanes across versus here where you're working with maybe 2 to 3 on each side. So certainly appreciate that. There's some recognition of like balancing the different needs in different spaces.
Thanks, Grace. Rafi, you want to ask your question? Then
Yeah,
Rob.
just a couple questions. The first one wasn't on my list, but it got mentioned. What is the rumble strip?
Oh, I think it's, if you imagine, I think the easiest way to explain is if you're on the highway and you have the space between the shoulder and your travel lane, you go over it, you feel the bumps as you're driving. It reminds you to go back into your lane. If you're familiar with that sensation of
Yeah,
driving over.
okay, I know what that is. So when you were saying, when Elijah was talking, where is it that you were saying there were going to be rumble strips, or there might be rumble strips?
So that would be where you see the white line, if I can move my mouse, right, white line, I believe.
The dotted line between the street and the bicycle lane?
Yes, and
But that might be, you're saying that might be a rumble strip?
yes, and visually, these are indents, I believe, rather than those that come out.
Okay, and that's, and I'm assuming that that's not a problem for bicyclists. I mean, and as I know what it feels like in a car to hit, to veer to the right, and it certainly gets your attention. I'm assuming bicyclists can keep in their lane. They don't worry about drifting into the traffic lane, because I would think it would be hard to balance a bike on a rumble strip.
So there has been a comment on that part, so that's why I think our consultant's going to take another look at it. Again, it might be something where spacing comes into play, where the further you have things spaced out. Again, I want to defer to them on their.
Okay. Two other questions. What are the little vertical green pieces that I see in the street?
So this is actually green paint, and if you can often see this even, imagine they weren't green but white, and they were cat tracks for bikes. That term is when, say, you're crossing this intersection and you want to keep that visual representation of where the lane is and where you're supposed to travel going. If you were in a vehicle and this intersection
Okay.
was off center, then there would be white dash lines similarly going across here.
So this is an extension of the bike lane, but with the permission of vehicles to cross over it.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It's just
Okay. And then when you were talking about the bump outs, I thought I heard you say something about concrete. So are the bump outs something other than what we have now, which is paint? Is there like a physical raised barrier?
so
That's
these
just
are
a question.
yes, these bump outs are permanent bump outs, so they're not. I wanted to separate them because I know when we have previously brought bump outs into play, they were tied to the flexi post. So that's why I wanted to clarify on materials. This is the standard bump outs that you see in other places. For example, we have bump outs on Tower Avenue and Charter Oak Ave. And those are just two examples of many. These are made out of concrete, and for this particular design, you do also have some paver style, which is that brown color.
So
here.
there's something that physically separates the bump out from the street, from the road.
Yes, this is
It's
curbing
actual
here,
curbing.
right here.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. No, this is just, I was just trying to understand what I was looking at.
Okay, thanks, Rafi. I can't remember, Rob and then Nick, or Nick and then Rob.
Rob, you can go first.
Yeah. So I just want to say I'm glad to see this actually coming to fruition. I saw this plan with Sandy when I first moved here a couple of years ago, so it's great to see it still happening. I do like the bump outs, but one of my original ideas was it'd be great to see kind of a separated bike lane, maybe two ways on one side of the street, but I understand with the bump outs, that's not really possible. But my main question is, with the updated bicycle infrastructure, are we going to be adding any bike parking to any of these streets, some bike racks here and there?
I don't have that off the top. I can certainly ask. I think the other benefit of having more space here, more public right of way, is that we have that opportunity for bicycle parking. I know we've had other requests for bike parking on Farmington Avenue, and with the way the corners are right now and some of the sidewalks, it's really hard to fit in, or we can't fit it in because we have to meet accessibility requirements. So if they're not in here, then I'll add that to the queue.
Yeah, I would just add, it'd be very beneficial to get people to use these bike lanes if people had somewhere to park their bike when they were, riding around the city. So I know that affects my decisions a lot, so.
Thanks, Rob. Nick?
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit further the space considerations for why it's more effective to use or to have the bike lane inside of or I guess inside to the road compared to the parking. Visually, it just looks like it would be the same if you switched them. Wondering if you could talk about that.
Right. So if we were looking at this orientation and we were to try to put the bike lane on the inside, it would conflict with where the bump outs are right now. So that's one physical aspect of it. I know, again, in terms of order of separation, the cycle track is the nicest where you're actually fully separated from the vehicular traffic. You're not sandwiched like what you're here in between. And then on Wethersfield Avenue, we actually have what's called parking protected bike lane, where the parking is on the outside of the bike lane. And but that also requires more space because there needs to be an additional door zone. So there was no space here between the bump outs and as well as the travel lane and the parking lane and the bike lanes to add in a buffer or a door zone. So trying to fit in all of those uses into one space, it was limited in how much could be in the orientation, my understanding.
I see. Thank you. So the bike lane also doubles as the door space for the parked cars.
So in terms of the parking protected, there is a separate door zone, but here, yes, it's the width of the bike lane is 5 feet wide. So door zone is typically between 2 and 3. Obviously, it's not ideal because again, you're sandwiched between cars and parked cars, but yeah, it's a bike lane standard, semi, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I'm not even sure if it's exactly part of this, but are there bus shelters as part of this?
Let me pull that. I believe they have currently existing. I have to admit,
There are not currently existing ones here.
maybe that's closer to the Asylum Hillside that I'm thinking about when it comes to bus shelters. So it's not noted here.
Is there some sort of
shelter, enhanced bus stop with shelter? So that's where you see this image
Okay.
on the legend.
This causes me to note that I think this plan contemplates that some of these the existing bus stops would change in some respects. I'm thinking, for example, that currently the bus stops going eastbound just before Oxford Street, and that appears not to be a place that the bus would stop in this design, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
So there has been some consolidation of bus stops in this design. So one, as it relates to, I know the Rapid Routes transit corridor was one example where it was mentioned that stop consolidation is what CT Transit is trying to head towards to improve the timing and the travel of the bus routes. This plan has been, developed with CT Transit's, collaboration to make sure that one, we're putting bus pads where there need to be, rear ends, front ends, placing them as noted. So, there has been some consolidation.
Yeah. And I take it any concerns about that really are more properly directed to CT Transit than to the city. In other words, they're driving that bus, no pun intended.
They are driving the bus. And I think the other thing is that, I may have to check in, but I'm wondering if they wouldn't be precluded from adding in a bus stop sign later down the line, even if there's a bump out. It would take away some of that parking if that area were to change into kind of a transit entry area. But from a surface level view, I'm thinking that, depending on, frequency and resident use, maybe that's something for them to consider as well.
Okay. Mary, I see your hand too, and then we should probably move on because we're at the hour mark. A couple other projects.
I put my hand back up again though, because of something that was just said. So I appreciate if you could keep me on the list.
Sure, sure. Mary, do you have a question? No, all right, Rafi, why don't you go ahead and then.
Well, this takes me back to previous meetings where there was I don't know which plan was which, and I don't know the difference, where originally there were like 5 bus stops in the West End that were going to be eliminated, and the West End Civic Association objected to that because it was forcing people to walk a fair distance between bus stops. And we, to our great pleasure, prevailed, and the revised version of the plan restored the bus stops. And so now I'm trying to understand from what you're saying, whether that decision, which was actually made at the request of I don't know if it was the West End Civic Association or a committee or what, is now essentially being reversed and the bus stops are being eliminated. I didn't appreciate that this design was showing where bus stops are. But for example, in the plan that we objected to, I believe there was no bus stop in between Whitney and Prospect, where the bus, I guess, currently stops. And we objected and they put the stops back in, I thought. So my question is, again, it's this interrelationship between different plans and different meetings. Has that changed? And if so, exactly what is it? Because that was a real concern about the loss of the bus stops. A number of people were very upset.
So when it comes to Whitney, they do have bus pads here. So just want to know on that particular location.
Well, I was just trying to remember well,
it might be
there were
Rafi,
different
not-
number of bus stops. Kyle may remember there were different number of bus stops going east and west. Sort of the issue was, will the bus stop at each of the corners? Do people have to walk? People who don't, seniors who can't walk well, do they have to walk a block and a half to get to a bus stop, or can they get off at the street corner? Those were the issues that were discussed, and I thought that whoever was running those workshops, and I thought it was somebody from the city, that it led to, maybe it wasn't workshops, maybe it was just draft plans we saw, but it led to a change of the plan to accommodate those concerns. So I don't remember exactly which corners. I'm only reacting to hearing you say, well, there's no bus, that they're limited bus stops, and I'm not sure which corners you're plugging bus stops into.
Right. So I do want to note that the Rapid Route Study is CROG-led. So that is the Regional Council of Governments, the Capital Regional Council of Governments that led that plan, which was then submitted to DOT. That study was undertaken, I think, much later than when this original design was, I think, in the process of being conceived. So that might be the accounting for the differences in timing. So just want to note that the processes and then the people that were doing these respective things are different. So that might be where there's a little bit of a disconnect. I can also go back and touch base with the design team to see maybe where there aren't bus pads, if there is still a standard metal stop sign bar. That's something I can double check on to see if maybe in these interim spaces there is that aspect, but just wanted to note. So again, if there are discrepancies, I did want to note that that the Rapid Route Study is a different lead on that one.
All right.
And what a perfect segue to this is part of the problem. You might just bring that back, is that we talked to lots of different planning teams in our neighborhood. I mean, I've lived here for 22 years, Rafi, much longer than I have. And, we say we've made a lot of points. A lot of them just get washed away. But in our Z's, we have designated members who participate in different studies, the transportation study, the environmental issues. And it would behoove the city and the neighborhood if you would actually bring that individual who's representing the neighborhood or a particular issue to your planning process, right? So that we just don't constantly have to react to, oops, I guess that got changed or whatever. So, okay, so with respect to bus stops, I just want to, Nick, who owns the stereo shop and who's been in this neighborhood forever, was very upset about the bus stop in front of his house shop. And I'm pretty sure if he could see that gone, he'd be so grateful. So that's just a opposite the area where Girard turns onto Farmington Avenue. So, but my actual last point was, I'd like to just highlight, my understanding is you're rebuilding this curbing and the sidewalks. Is that correct? That this plan, right? And I realize there's a lot of people who are perfectly happy riding on the streets. But I think these bike lanes in between the bus and the parked cars and the speeding cars it's just like single stream recycling. People are saying this is the way we're all going, and in about 10 or 15 years everybody will say, doesn't work so much, So I just wanted to say that because I just think we ought to be spending our money widening these sidewalks and really ratcheting down the width of the street. And that would be a great way to spend the money for our taxpayers.
All right, that's I think we'll go back on the list here to another project. In sort of Grace's defense, I just want to note that on this plan it says bus stop locations to be coordinated with CT Transit. So I didn't mean to open a can of worms here. It may not be the case that this is necessarily reflective of where the actual bus stops are, but it certainly means it's something we need to follow up on with CT Transit to make sure that there's not another decision that's being made separate apart from this that we've already had input into. So going backwards, couple of other points, maybe Grace, and we can let you go. That the Albany Avenue sidewalk enhancements, I guess this is the touching on the part that goes in the northern piece of the West End, and I updated our little list here based on your feedback about widening the sidewalks into side paths, but maybe you can, I'll let you say it because you'll be far more precise than I would be.
So on the Albany Ave side path, that is essentially the area that stretches from Homestead all the way to Bloomfield Drive. And it would actually be on the north side of that, not in streets. And that is where the bike plan noted that due to the volume and the width, etc., due to those factors, a side path would be the preferred option in that space. And the side path is essentially, for simplicity's sake, saying a wide inside sidewalk where you do have multiple uses in that space. That area has the right of way to accommodate it. And so that would again extend the what you see on the Albany Ave Streetscape, that kind of style, moving that across the bridge and then further up to Bloomfield Drive. That north side also has fewer conflicts when it comes to number of driveways and crossings. So that's why the north side was chosen in terms of feasibility. So that feasibility was done for 30% just to see, is it even possible to do this? Should we move beyond? Because the study showed that was fruitful. We also sent out a mailer last year, so that, and we had 2 opportunities for a presentation, a virtual and an in-person, so that those who are living on the street, will, per the U.S. Postal Service area, would be able to denote that. So now that we have, gone through that, we are trying to get that design to 100% so that we can move forward. So it's not in street, and it's an extension of widening that space where possible, from Homestead to Bloomfield. So it's, I think, concept-wise simpler than, trying to mix in different aspects of, like a streetscape is, parking, landscaping, intersection treatments, etc.
Actually, sorry to jump in, but there was this whole thing around the Village for Family and Children needing to put fencing around their property. And one of the suggestions that came up in the discussions about that was, that corner at Albany and Bloomfield Avenue, and how, would there be a way for the city to buy some of that corner so that an off-road bicycle path could be there? Because I think there's a lot of restrictions on the Village for Family and Children, their development options. And I'm glad to hear that you all are planning an off-road bicycle path in that area. Is there anything the West End Civic Association could do to encourage the city to negotiate with the Village for Family and Children to just make a more graceful curve around that corner? And, I don't know, I'm sure there would be some compensation needed for that, but, or is the bike trail just the paved path that's off-road just paralleling the streets?
It would be paralleling the street. But notably, I think a little north of that, there's also going to be some work done. I'm not recalling the number on the Mark Twain, Westbrook Village, Mark Twain Drive, where they're also having some inner campus bike lane. I hope I'm recalling that right. There's more the land use team that works with these applications, where we're also hoping to eventually connect this to. So hopefully, it won't just be, parallel. We'll have that as a spine where we can branch into the other opportunities that are nearby.
I would just encourage the planning team to actually talk to the Village for Family and Children about that corner and what the village is planning for. They're planning a fence somewhere. So you may, I hope, I'm assuming somebody is, but I'll just emphasize that. And again, a more graceful and beautiful curve at that corner with maybe some trees would be beneficial for everyone.
Okay. Great. Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next one on the list. Is the East Coast Greenway bicycle enhancements, and I think this was largely a CROG plan, Grace, but you had some visibility into this, I think, if my notes are right.
Right. So I did want to share that. So CROG, again, the Capital Region Council of Governments, is undertaking the East Coast Greenway Gap Study. Basically, the East Coast Greenway is an intent to have a connected, network of, bike-friendly areas from Maine down to all the way to Florida across the East Coast. In Connecticut, a notable gap is between Bloomfield, Hartford, East Hartford, and then separately Simsbury. So CROG is undertaking that effort to kind of knit the potential options together. They are going to have a public meeting. They're starting up their public workshops over the course of the next month. Hartford is tentatively scheduled for April 18th. I know they're working on a flyer. We'll get that out on our newsletter. I'm sure they're going to get that out in their newsletter as well, to make sure that people are aware of that. If you're not able to make that meeting, which is going to be in person, likely at Keeney Park Pond House, once they've confirmed, then there's also a presentation that they'll be making virtually to the Planning and Zoning Commission this Tuesday. Again, it's just introducing the study so that next year when they've finished the study, that they're not surprised by, what's been happening. So it's more about them introducing the study and the team, and then moving forward with public engagement at the actual workshop meeting. So was
Great.
there a comment?
I, of course, have my hand raised because for many years, this has been a huge problem with the North Branch. And somebody from Asylum Hill sent me the plans today and showed we had been so hopeful that that we had demonstrated effectively that the Heartline, which is above the floodplain, which doesn't flood regularly, which actually goes through neighborhoods where people live, is a much better choice for the East Coast Greenway efficiency, the cost per mile of construction, a whole list of things. But the plan that Lynn Johnson from Asylum Hill Neighborhood Association sent me was that the East Coast Greenway is now being shown both running down the North Branch as through the floodplains, across expensive terrain that will have to be severely modified in order to get the flattened path. And we'll eventually have to have lighting and a whole array of equipment to maintain it in the floodplain. That's still on the books, and now the Heartline is as well. So, I think from the Asylum Hill Neighborhood Association side, they have a stronger position on this, how do we submit comments? Do we just write CROG and try to clarify once again the challenges with the aspiration that Sandy Fry has never really quite let go of, that to run a bicycle, the East Coast Greenway, she wanted it going through nature, even though most people would like it to go, in a beautiful area that's accessible to this city residents.
So since it is a CROG project, I do want to defer to them, but thanks to Matt for putting into the chat the Capital Region link. From there's the interactive map, which if you click into, you can actually comment directly on each of the options that are in there. There's also the contact information for Caitlin Palmer, who is the project manager for this project. So that's another way. And they also have another link where you can sign up for email updates if you wanted to get that as well.
Because we've been working on this for so long, it's so hard to convey to people the differences in what they're seeing on the map. They're two very different circumstances, and the planning community hasn't really worked to communicate the differences in why destroy the last unmodified landscape, one of the most unusual forests is, why do those things when you have a more efficient and route through the city. Again, we have a more complex public comment, but we also need public education to at least share the balanced information about the challenges of building in the floodplain, which, by the way, the South Branch is currently, now that the trail has never been maintained, it's coming apart. When they did cut it, they had to use pesticides on it, which is bad for the water, et cetera, et cetera. Like, none of these things are actually being discussed when people see a line on a map like that.
So I'll just note on the map, that interactive map does allow options to have the public comments be available. So I did see that someone had already made a comment on, promoting the Griffin line and the Griffin line option over the other option, which does cross the North Branch. So through those comments, other people can see that same feedback that you can upload straight to the website. But I know I'm a little bit more, again, CROG is the one facilitating the actual conversation, and how they're going to present it at the April meeting. I think it's something where having everybody's presence there, if possible, is certainly, I'm sure they would welcome it. And I know that they're primarily trying to show all the options on the map, as a due diligence of sharing what, has been previously proposed, is currently being proposed, et cetera. So that doesn't mean all of those will end up being the one.
Great. Well, that takes us through the list on the topics that I think Grace is sort of within her bailiwick. I don't know, Grace, if there are any closing thoughts you had, or if there was anything else we talked about but I didn't march through tonight that you had any more information for us on, that would be great. But I think otherwise that's the list of projects we have your name next to.
Right, and appreciate the opportunity to share updates and talk through some of these designs together. I do want to make a brief mention on the Sisson to Forest potential path. We're still on the very, very early stages. We're just trying to figure out DOT ownership of the space, especially underneath the bridges in that area. But wanted to let you know that we had already been thinking about it when someone had reached out to us from the West End side. And then on the Heartline side, which is the Griffin line, where it's being proposed for rail to trail, making an opportunity of that space. That's also something we're trying to gear up to design, but of course have to do all the documentation, accept the award, and et cetera, in advance of that. So just letting you know that those projects are out there, but certainly not to the same level that we're at with these other activities.
Great. Well, thank you, Grace, for taking time out this evening to update us. It's certainly been informative for me. So I'll pass it back to Kyle, I guess, to formally wrap this up. But I think absent anybody having any other pressing business, we should adjourn.
Great. Thank you, Grace and Matt. Excellent work. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think as I was making notes, it seemed to me the next steps for this group. One of the big ones is we need to be sure we schedule a May meeting to talk about the Asylum Avenue updates that are coming out in April. So Grace will be in touch and probably want to try to get you back for that. That'll definitely be a single topic meeting. It's not something I would put in with a general meeting. And in fact, our May general meeting, the intention is to have a mayoral forum. So that's, totally separate. And then the other kind of immediate piece of business, it seemed like, was we need to find out when CROG is going to hold their East Coast Greenway meeting and make sure we disseminate that information to the community so that folks who are interested can participate. Beyond that, I guess I would just plant the seed to the folks here that I would love to have a chair or co-chairs kind of take the lead on this one. And I said that in the email I sent out earlier. This is the sort of thing where I'm personally interested in it, but it's probably not a great idea for me to be leading it because there's too many other things that distract me. So give it some thought, and at a future meeting we can figure that out. And I will probably be in touch via email to schedule a next meeting once we figure out what we want to talk about. Go ahead, Grace.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt the flow, but just as it relates to Asylum, I know Asylum Hill is going to be introducing some of the proposed modifications so that when May comes, that their team will, their residents will feel a little bit more comfortable on discourse. I know you're not meeting necessarily in April, but if it would help, Kyle, I could put together a quick summary paragraph if you wanted to share that during one of your newsletters, if you wanted to, of course.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think, the tricky thing with that project is the significant changes are happening in Asylum Hill, far more significant than in our neighborhood. So I would just try to keep it focused on the West End piece of it because there are more limited changes, but people have very strong feelings about the bollards and kind of some of the other aspects. And if you could just preserve what Diane said in the notes. I mean, she lives on the corner of Scarborough, so this impacts her directly.
Right, and I realized, yeah, that I had missed a couple of the chats, so maybe I can touch base with you offline about,
Yep,
I know
that's
I can't
perfect.
copy and paste here.
I can send you the full chat just so you have it. Okay, so
One other quick thing.
yes,
One other, and I know you have a lot on your list, I apologize. We need to make sure that the bus stops are what we wanted through Connecticut Transit on the Farmington Avenue project.
yes. Thank you. I'll add that to the list, and the fourth thing on my list is for me to follow up with Mary offline about neighborhood planning at the city.
Thank
Right.
you. Thank you. And thank you, Grace. Sorry to be, have so many questions, but these are, we all care. So thank you for being here.